Hello again, everybody. This is Dan Clouser, and welcome back to the Journey of My Mother's Son podcast. Today I'm joined by an old colleague, business mate, friend from up north of the border, my first official international guest, Paul Cartwright. Paul is the president of Sports Celebrity Marketing. Paul, thanks for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me, Dan. Dan, it's a real pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So, before we started, just to give people a little bit of a background, our relationship goes back to the Berkshire Baseball and Big Vision days, where we used your agency to book a lot of our speakers for our banquets and other events that we did. The first speaker we ever booked through you was Al Oliver. Back in 2002, January 2002, Al came and spoke at our banquet, and still one of the coolest guys I've ever met. So, first of all, you started sports celebrity marketing back in 1998. So, tell me a little bit about what got you into, being a sports agent and wanting to book players, and how that all came about.
Sure. I've got a business mind. Unfortunately, I didn't get the athlete's body that I wished I had. It got my business degree, marketing, finance, really good at orchestrating things. As a kid, I played sports all the time. I am so glad I'm not a kid in today's era, because I couldn't be satisfied sitting with a little video game flicking my thumbs. I had to be outside with a ball all the time. I was never indoors, whether it was throwing it, kicking it, shooting it, whatever. I was a sports guy. Unfortunately, the good Lord blessed me with the body that I have, not the athlete's body. So I was good in hockey, but not good enough. I was very good in baseball, but not good enough. I was good in soccer, just shy of what it took. So I went the business route, but always had that passion for sports. So I was in the consumer packaged goods world for some food companies. I was in sales and marketing. And a couple of my suppliers were former NHL hockey players. And I did a promotion on some ice cream with a CFL superstar. Got to know these guys, started asking questions about how do I combine my love of sports with my abilities in business. And questions like, so once you guys retire, the agents leave because there's no more income stream. Who books you? Is there anything organized that books you for various types of opinions? And, by and large, it was hit and miss. So I just found that opening. And through those guys, met them, did right by them. As soon as you do right by somebody, they introduce you to their teammates. Again, you do right by them. A guy in, say, Pittsburgh that played for the Penguins then says, you know what, I played with some Steelers and some Pirates. Let me introduce you to those guys. So it was just a whole lot of networking by doing the right things. So just over time, just gravitated to do that, tried to put it together and figure it out as I went along. I had no blueprint other than what I wrote for myself. And, fortunately, here we are 22 years later. My son was born the very month that I founded this business. So he's literally been in it. He could give you a whole list of Hall of Famers that have slept in his bed who come through and want to stay at our house rather than a hotel because my wife's a good cook. So, he's been used to giving up his bed for guys and sleeping on the couch, and he's now in the business with me full time. So the two of us do together, which is fantastic. That's kind of how I got into it. Just fell into it.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome, and I love the fact that you didn't really have a blueprint for it, but I think what you said there for anyone who's in business is, quite frankly, the blueprint is do good to people, and if you don't treat that first speaker or that first player right, it's a pretty quick experiment, I think.
Yeah, I actually wrote this down probably within the first 6 months. I wrote it on a piece of paper that I still have on my desk. It said, if you mess up, Paul, You have no inventory. You don't sell any goods. You don't have a warehouse of stuff that you can sell for the next 3 years to make a living. If you make a mistake and you hurt somebody, your business is done, because as quickly as I networked to gain guys, that word will go out and I will lose guys and no one will want to touch me. So it was very quick learning of always do, as a friend of mine says, you can never do wrong by doing right.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And it kind of puts some perspective in for me, because like I said, the first, first speaker we ever booked through you was, Al Oliver in 2002. So you were really still kind of a fledgling, agent, call it, at that point.
Yep.
And, I can attest from day one, you did good to our organization. You picked up the phone when I called. If you didn't, you called me right back. You checked in throughout the travel process and making sure they got there right, and that they did right, that we were satisfied with them. So I can definitely speak, firsthand experience that, you hold up to that, even today, that
Thank you.
you're looking to do good to both your client players and your client organizations that are looking to bring that player in. So that's very cool. So who was the very first player you ever booked?
That's a good question. I believe it was a NHL referee by the name of Bruce Hood. Bruce is no longer with us, but he was an NHL referee who went in to become a politician. He ran a travel agency. He did a number of different things, very eclectic interests, very intelligent man. And I had him, he was in the Toronto area. I had him fly to Dallas for a corporate event, speaking event, and he brought the host down. Bruce just passed away about 3 years ago. We lost him.
Yeah, that's awesome. So from, obviously you've got a huge network now. Is there any one particular player that, really kind of stands out, who's had an influence on you personally?
By answering that question, I will do an injustice to the guys that I don't mention, because there's so many of them that in some way, shape, or form have. One guy that comes to mind is a guy who mentored me getting into this business. His name's Mike Pinball Clemens. American viewers probably won't know the name. He played 1 year in the NFL, and at that time held the record for being the shortest player in the NFL. He was running back at 5'4". Ran back kicks and punts and things that way. He came up to Toronto in the CFL in the early 80s, I believe it was. And just a wonderful man. I've often urged him to run for political office. I think he's who we need in Ottawa, honestly, as our Prime Minister. The man's compassion, the man's insight is unbelievable. We met when I was with a consumer packaged goods company. He was one that helped me figure some things out. And he and his wife became great friends with our family. They attended my wife and my wedding not too long after we had met them. And Mike is the godfather to my kids today. He's a beautiful Christian man, a great heart, great compassion, always sees beyond what I see. So if I see an injustice in front of me, that's what I see. I react to it. Mike's mind allows him to go past that and understand deeper and further than I do. And it's such a blessing to be around the guy, because I learn so much from him every time. My kids absolutely adore him. And he's been one of the best influences in my life.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know what you mean. And I know that's kind of a loaded question to have you try to single out, one guy, because there's so many, and I know just the guys that we've booked through you, whether it be Al Oliver, Bernie Carbo, or Bill
Great,
Lee,
yeah.
or Sean Gibson, you booked for us, who's the grandson of Josh Gibson. In just the short time that I interacted with each of those individuals, I learned so much, and it was really cool. So I also want to talk about, you kind of segued into it a little bit with that last story, but you are a man of faith, and the way we kind of reconnected here was by you sending me an email about a prayer group that you're involved with, and that's when I reached out, replied and was like, hey, I'd love to be a part of this, add me to the list. And by the way, did you know that I stepped down from Big Vision Foundation and Berkshire Baseball, and my wife and I are going to be selling everything and loading up an RV and driving around. So tell me a little bit how your faith has played a part in your business.
Yeah, obviously I started this business to provide for my family. So it was a way of making ends meet and paying my bills and so on, just as everybody else does. And as I met guys and networked, I had in the back of my mind, oh, I know this guy's a Christian. I believe this guy's a believer. I remember reading a faith story on this particular individual. So I just started to compile some thoughts as I went along. And then the Lord kind of convicted me. I've given you the abilities to do this. How are you using that for me? Good question, Lord. So, I reconnected with a lot of these guys and said, do you enjoy sharing your faith? What is your story? I want to understand it. I don't want to put the wrong guy in the wrong spot and have a terrible failure of some sort. But a lot of the guys said, yeah, I'd love to go to churches, whether it's men's breakfast, worship services, prayer rallies, outreach events, marriage retreats. I'd love to share my faith. My wife's a strong believer. We could do it as a team. We could do it this way. So then we started contacting churches. And it's funny that this ties into your comment about the prayer letter. The gentleman who heads up the prayer letter is a gentleman named Bob Johnson. He's with Athletes in Action Ontario. And his role right now is to help churches build their sports ministry. He's a consultant in the sports ministry side of things. So he'll help churches use athletics, usually kids athletics, but also bringing in pros, and I help him with that. And that's how Bob and I connected probably 20 years ago as well. So through all those various things, we've had guys with Promise Keepers and various other things speaking at some of the big events years ago. Our church side of the business is almost as big now as our corporate side. It doesn't pay near as well, but there's a bigger reward for it.
No doubt.
Right? One pays the bill, the other paves the way to eternity. So we're very happy to do both, and nothing's better than when you call either the athlete or the church afterwards, and you find out there was an altar call, and one person or 10 people or 100 people went forward and gave their lives to Christ because of the testimony this guy shared, and just to be able to go, thank you, Lord, for giving me the ability to connect these groups.
Yeah, that's awesome, and it is, it's funny. Again, just the way the Lord works sometimes, and we may not see it right away, but as we kind of look back and connect the dots, you can see it. So again, I think another perfect segue to talk about your recently published author, which I think is very cool because as you know, I published a book back in 2012, and I'm actually adding a bunch of chapters to it, so it'll be republished hopefully this year. But you did it with Stephen Johnson Jr., and the title of it is A Walk in Our Cleats. So tell me a little bit about the book, how it came about, and what you and Stephen were looking to accomplish by publishing it.
Sure. Stephen at the time was a Pittsburgh Steeler. My wife and I knew a few Steeler guys, and we go to training camp every once in a while. I've been in touch with Stephen. We met up with him and his wife. We went out for dinner together, and he just said, you know, I run a children's foundation, teaching them how to play football, but faith is integral to my life as well. So I want to leave the kids with that. He says, I'd love to have a book that somebody could write the testimonies of myself, some of my friends who play in the NFL, guys I played with in college, and just share their testimonies with some football stories, so that I can hand this book out to the kids when I do my camps. You know, maybe it's something he can sell as well online, but really aimed at the young kids are at his camp. So I don't know if you can see it there. This is the book. Sorry about the glare. Called A Walk in Our Cleats. And Stephen put us in touch with 25 of his friends. So these are all guys that played in the NFL, either with Stephen or against Stephen. Some he played with in college. And we got the opportunity to interview the guys, get some of the funny stories, the things you don't hear that happen in the locker room, some of those great stories, some of the football stories, learn about the guy's upbringing, and then always ending with, tell us about your faith. How did you come to Christ? What does it mean to you now? What's your favorite verse? So we got the opportunity to interview guys like Ryan Shazier. We talked to Ryan just before he got hurt. It was when we interviewed him. Fabulous guy. We were in touch with him today. We just had dinner with him after a Steelers game last year. It's like, hey, you guys are in town. Come on out and, you know, meet my teammates. And my son just about jumped out of his shoes. It was awesome. Ben Roethlisberger. You know, Ben got a bad rap. I'll tell you, he's one of the most sincere, nice guys you could ever imagine. Ben Watson, who, you know, if you're on social media at all, you know this guy's insight into life, and just a brilliant man. Lorenzo Alexander, Matthew Slater, who's got probably 2 hands full of Super Bowl rings. Brandon Marshall, Chris Harris Jr., one of the best DBs in the game, and a bunch of other guys. So lots of fun writing their stories. So, some tear jerkers in there. We got guys who, you know, maybe raised by a single parent, real tough times and what they came through, and gangs and violence and so on. Other guys who came from homes of privilege, which doesn't mean you don't have problems.
Right. Doesn't
mean you don't need a savior. So no matter what you came through, you ended up in the same spot of accepting the Lord. And that's what the book is about. It's written kind of for that young teenage age group. Lots of pictures in it to keep kids entertained, and just some great football stories, some funny stuff, some tear-jerking stuff, and always very impactful.
That's
lots of fun doing.
That's very cool. I'm when we're done with this podcast, I'm ordering it, so I'm looking forward to reading it. So you know, I think, you know, when we talk about your faith and your journey, I think one thing we also would be remiss to not talk about, especially in this day and age, is you know, obviously I'm down here in America, and we're going through some tough times racially. You're in a mixed race marriage. Tell me a little bit about some of the feelings you're going through watching the news from America. And again, obviously Canada's not immune to racism. The world's not immune to racism. And I think this is a conversation we need to, you know, keep this dialogue going from multiple perspectives. So as someone coming from a mixed race marriage, you know, just what are some of your feelings and thoughts about what's going on today?
Yeah, it's a very, very tough time, and something that we need to fix, shall I say, once and for all. I was around in 67. I grew up an hour outside of Detroit when the race riots were going on in 67, and I remember seeing smoke in the sky from the city burning when I was a 6-year-old kid. You know, 68, Martin Luther King was assassinated. You know, lots of stuff happened, but when I look back and I go, wow, that was 50 years ago, not that much has changed. And somehow it's got to change, and it's got to stick. And that's, I don't know, there's not an easy solution to it, but I mean, we've got to pray about it. We've got to demonstrate. We've got to show those in power that We mean business. Things have to change. I've got a 22-year-old son and a 24-year-old daughter. I don't worry about them too much here in Canada, although, as you said, there's absolutely racism here and there's racism everywhere. But my son almost went to the U.S. on a baseball scholarship, and he said to me the other day, you know what, I'm really glad I didn't. As a young black man, he'd just be afraid of being pulled over by a cop and something happening. And I know lots of policemen who are wonderful people who would gladly lay down their life for them. So, there's a lot of things at play here. But, I think short term, there's got to be some legislation that forces some changes. I think whenever you force a change, that's a short term thing, because you're not bending people's wills, you're imposing your will on them, and that will only lead to another flare up in violence. But short term, something's got to be done legislatively to pull things in line. And then longer term, I think the only thing is to teach our children that skin color just doesn't matter. And that's a long term thing, because our kids are, 4 or 5 years old, 3 years old. That's when you've got to teach them that there is no difference. And it's into their 20s before they're able to act on that. So that's a longer term thing, but that's really the ultimate solution. Is my wife and I go out, I don't even notice that she's black. I was several years ago, Willie Horton had a statue dedicated to him outside of Comerica Park. I had met Willie, we were friends. He invited me over to his house for a big celebration. There were 300 people. Willie's one of 18 kids. So lots of relatives. There were 300 people there. And I came back and somebody said to me, oh, how was it? And I was given some details, and they said, you're the only white guy there? I said, I don't know. Like, I don't even notice, right? I'm at family reunions. I don't notice that I'm the white guy. And that's not to say that I don't see colors and everybody looks some shade of purple. It's just, it doesn't matter it's not that I don't see it. It doesn't matter. So it just doesn't even register. And that's where we kind of have to get people to. We can force them to do things, but we have to teach them that as the Bible says, all men are created in God's image. And if you got a problem with your fellow man, you got a problem with God, because that guy's in your image.
Yeah, and I think it's so important when you talk about, really educating our youth and making them understand. And here in the U.S., I think it starts, and there's so many layers to the onion, and we don't have enough time to talk about all of it. But I think education here in the U.S. is vital. In our schools, we're not teaching the real history of this country. We're teaching a whitewashed version. I mean, I find myself to be a pretty educated man, and again, I'm fortunate that I was raised by two parents who taught me to look at people as my equal and not to judge them until you have a conversation with them and understand their actions. And I've been able to teach that to, my kids and grandkids as well. But when, in the last 2 weeks, I'm only learning of what happened in Tulsa in 1919 during Black Wall Street, when I should have learned about that in 6th or 7th grade history class, and so that's really this, like, hey, look, we're not proud of this history, but we still got to teach it. Okay, we got to teach the real history of what we did to Native American Indians. We got to teach the real history of what we did to Black people and slaves in the early infant parts of this country. And then I think when you have that conversation and, people start talking about Black Lives Matter, and then they say, well, no, shouldn't all lives matter? Well, of course all lives should matter, but all lives can't matter until Black lives matter. So I think if our kids know that history, it's a lot easier to understand the context of what that means when someone says Black Lives Matter. So definitely 100% in agreement with you that it starts with our kids, and that's really how we create change. And like I said, there definitely needs to be some legislative change, but I think I'm optimistic in seeing that there is grassroots change and people are more willing to have this dialogue and talk about it. I mean, like that's the first step is let's talk about it. Let's put ourselves in the room with people that don't look like us
Yep.
and listen to them and hear their perspective. So, you know, it's heartbreaking, but at the same time, optimistic that when you look at some of these rallies here in the U.S., a lot of these rallies are being led by young kids. I mean, there is one here locally, yes, and it was, you know, 19, 20-year-old, you know, group of kids that started this. So, you know, and I think kids are more willing to ask why, you know, wait, why is this happening? So there's definitely some optimism in our, you know, in what we're seeing for sure. So we're just about out of time, but any other things you want to add till we get to our final question about, you know, whether it's sports celebs or the book, your marriage, you name it, any last things?
Yeah, I think I'm good. Just if anybody's looking for a sports celebrity for an event, we're here.
All right. We'll definitely give a plug to that here shortly. I told you at the beginning, I always ask my guests the one final question as the subtitle of the podcast is Many Little People, Many Little Places, which comes from a Michael Franti song called Gloria, where the opening lines say, when many little people in many little places do many little things, then the whole world changes. So, Paul, what are one of the little things that you feel you've done to make the world a better place?
I think maybe it is just by being in the background and doing what I do. As you can tell from this face, I'm not built to be at the foreground. As a joke goes, I got a great face for radio.
I've said the same.
But I know some people who make great impacts on lives. And those people who are creative and give a great message, their weakness may be the ability to orchestrate their lives, to get from A to B, to make those connections. That's what I'm good at. So I'm very pleased that a number of lives have been impacted corporately, in churches, in foundations, just in general life, by guys I've managed to book in certain places who give a message where a kid or an adult or anyone else goes, I learned something today that is going to change my life. And when I get that feedback from customers or from our celebrities that, you know what, I think we impacted somebody, that's what I live for.
I think that's awesome. And I think, again, that's a great message. You know, the world needs Michael Jordan, but you need Scottie Pippen as well. You know, Walter Payton wouldn't have been the player he was without Matt Stewie, you know. And, you know, I in my sports background, you know, in baseball, I was a catcher. In football, I was a lineman, you know, so it wasn't about me in those two roles, you know. So I love that analogy for sure. So, and again, before we sign off, you just, you know, what's your website if someone wants to go on there and look at your clientele, and how do they get a hold of you if they want to book a speaker?
Yeah, the website is www.sportscelebs.com. You can reach me at paul@sportscelebs.com, or my cell phone number is 647-221-8405. So whether you're looking for a celebrity to speak, to golf, to you want to do a baseball clinic or a hockey camp or a football camp, you've got a need in your church to have the right speaker in to reach some kids, reach out to us.
Awesome. And again, as a happy client, I can definitely give you the thumbs up that
Thank you.
You know, anybody that reaches out to you, they will be satisfied with the service that you get for sure. So, and again, folks, as always, be sure to check out my blog and listen to my past podcast at danclouser.com. Well, thanks again for joining me. It's truly a pleasure.